What's going on? My name is Michael and welcome to Fudge Muppet. A lot of people have asked us for our updated thoughts on Starfield, so today I'm going to be giving you exactly that. We've taken our time to watch the new showcase multiple times, listen to all the follow-up interviews and info drops, and basically just chill out and let all this new content sink in without rushing anything out. If you've already subscribed, then you'd know we've held a fair amount of skepticism around many aspects of Starfield, though over time as we've seen more, we've gradually become a little more optimistic. Sure, we'd prefer a higher fantasy sci-fi game with sentient alien races with their own histories and cultures, a true Skyrim in space, if you will, over the grounded NASA punk vibes and what I think is better called Fallout in space, but there is a bunch of good coming out of the showcase, and especially the post-showcase interviews that Bethesda deserves praise for. I'm much more excited for Starfield than I was before, and I have to say it's looking super fun. Of course, there are still areas we remain skeptical around, but just remember any skepticism is subjective, and overall we thought the showcase was pretty good and showed us way more than we expected to see. First up, I want to say that the graphical enhancements and overall visual upgrades since the last showcase definitely make things feel a little less washed out and more lively than the earlier trailers and showcases portrayed. The enemy AI looks much better and the combat in general is feeling smoother than we've seen so far. It's starting to look really fun, and it's great to see Bethesda use someone for the footage who plays the game a bit more seriously, aiming accurately, utilizing cover when they need to, being agile, using their boost pack tactically, and overall just playing the game in a more competent way, especially compared to the prior gameplay where they more so just walked on out at the enemies and shot at them with little thought and effort put into it. As I mentioned, the AI looks a lot better too. We didn't really see people just running away from you backwards or just climbing on top of an obstacle for no good reason at all. As someone who mostly plays open world games, I don't have crazy high standards for the shooting mechanics of a vast open world BGS game. I'm pretty much happy with Fallout 4's shooting, so what we saw is definitely good enough for me to be happy. We've also been told that there's been a ton of fine-tuning and bug testing going on, which is awesome to hear. If they're going for a game that's more grounded in reality and they want to play with physics in different moments and really make you feel low gravity and things like that from time to time, then it's probably pretty important not to have that kind of immersion ruined by a T-posing NPC frozen static in the air while other items and NPCs float past them. The showcase also showed off some more aesthetic weapons and armor options than we'd previously seen, and I'm really glad to see more of the cowboy type Aquila outfits too. I remember we said in one of our earlier Starfield videos ages ago that we hope it isn't always just people in spacesuits and that it would be cool if there's like gunslinger vibes for some characters, and now it looks like there can be. Of course, it makes sense that you'll still need a spacesuit on planets where it's appropriate, but it's nice to see a bit more of the aesthetic variety the game has to offer. And just like previous BGS games, we did see that you can in fact loot armor from enemies after killing them, but as you may have noticed, this didn't seem super consistent, which is a little confusing. Sometimes you can't take enemy armor, and maybe that's because if you shoot their boost pack, making them explode or simply spray too many bullets into an enemy, it causes too much damage to their spacesuit, making it useless. If so, this could incentivize some melee kills or even some headshot only attempts on certain foes if you want to steal their armor, or at least increase the chance it's salvageable. But again, the reality is that we simply don't know what the formula is here for looting. It could be entirely random or restricted in some instances. We'll just have to wait and see, but I do hope there's a cool reason for why sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. Seeing the death from above landmine throwing miniguns, all the different weapon types including the mag weapons, and various unique effects was a really good sign that there will be a bunch of different ways to enjoy the combat, not to mention the specific playstyle approaches like stealth and maybe even a pacifist option to avoid combat altogether, though we'll have to see exactly how that goes. There also appears to be a tier system of gear with different ranks, like rare items that have bonus effects and legendary items that have even more effects. Given the whole focus on procedural generation in Starfield, I'm sure that this is going to be very similar to Fallout 4, where certain enemies could just drop legendary weapons with a list of preset effects randomly applied onto them. You may know that as a lover of previous Elder Scrolls and Fallout games that I'm not the biggest fan of this kind of randomized setup, but you can make it work and still use it in a way that I'd enjoy under two conditions. Firstly, I hope it makes sense. In Fallout, when you find a baseball bat that can freeze enemies when you hit them, it's a fun laugh, but it feels super unrealistic. And before people say, oh, but it's a game with super mutants and ghouls and you're talking about realism, what I'm saying is that I want things to abide by the in-game lore and feel of the universe the game is set in. If Starfield has a dagger that deals fire damage, I hope that it's possible to assume that it's because of some sci-fi ignition technology implanted in the handle that travels up through the blade and gets inflicted on foes, or something of that nature, and not simply just because. was. This can easily be made more believable if you simply restrict certain effects from certain pieces of gear. Speaking of melee combat really quickly, I didn't think it looked that fresh, but at the same time, as a huge BGS fan, I don't really expect that much more beyond Fallout 4's melee, which I was able to enjoy. It would be cool to see a bunch of finishes too. They don't have to be Skyrim animation camera style, but they could be Fallout 4 style if you remember those ones. I'd love a sneak attack finisher move. I can say as someone who's spent a decade flying a camera around BGS games, I do notice some things in the showcase where I think gameplay gets cut because something didn't look neat for the video. For example, in the stealth scene where the player stalks up behind their target and then it cuts away before an attack, this could be because it was some kind of Skyrim looking power attack or stab attack animation that simply sent the enemy dying forwards onto the floor and didn't look as polished as some throat slit finisher animation that would be a lot cooler to implement. Just a guess though. I do hope there is some sort of stealth finisher though. Unarmed combat looks a little clunky to me, but it looks fun and pretty high octane, so I definitely want to give it a go. Anyway, requirement number 1 for enjoying a bunch of randomized legendary type weapons was for them to make sense. The second requirement for enjoying such a system for me is that Bethesda doesn't simply replace actual unique items with these to an excessive extent. In Fallout 4 there were separate unique pieces of gear with unique names and appearances, which was good, but some items designed to feel like uniques were just renamed base weapons with modifications you could craft yourself and legendary effects you could randomly find. I would hope there are plenty of weapons to get from quests or faction choices or some of the handcrafted locations that do exist on planets that are not able to be replicated through crafting or random loot under any circumstances. Being as objective as I can be, I'd say that an excessive emphasis on randomly generated gear and less actual unique items is a real possibility. I definitely prefer a game with more unique weapons with set locations because it feels more rewarding to find and use something so handcrafted. It allows Bethesda to actually add visual effects to the items that explain what gives them their unique capabilities. It provides more opportunities to add lore to a universe that may feel empty without it, because a handcrafted piece of gear that does something cool can have a unique story behind it and the unique place you find it in. Maybe a bunch of pirates tried to fuse ancient alien tech they found into an axe, only to die in the process once the weapon was complete. Maybe the player can wield it safely given their affinity for such technologies. You get the idea. And again, I'm not staunchly against the addition of randomized loot at all. It absolutely can be fun to not know what you're going to come across on different playthroughs and to find different things to other people. I would just hope there's a healthy mix of both that doesn't tilt too far into the randomized direction. Anyway, this will be a little more of a wait and see type of thing, and wait and see seems to be how I feel about a fair bit of what we're seeing. There's so many things people have strong opinions on that we simply just don't know the answers to. Even the extent of just how randomly generated planets will be is not fully known, with people still arguing over it. I remember in a previous video from the last showcase, I was talking with Scott about the idea of whether two people could go to the same planet and see completely different landmarks, which is clearly now proven possible based on the showcase. It literally shows us that, but in the comments previously, people were telling us that we didn't understand what Bethesda was saying and that what they'll really do is use generation to make planets and then go comb over every single one of them with handcrafted care and make all planets the same for everyone in every way. Clearly, that is not the case here. Point being, it sounds like the procedural generation is actually going to make up way more of the environments, including locations, than many people previously thought, and it won't be the same for everyone, and we simply do not have the answers to how much handcrafted or set content there is. What we do know from Todd's most recent content is that only 100 planets of the roughly 1,000 in the game actually have life on them. And remember, that's life, so aliens and plants and so on. That doesn't necessarily mean they have quests on them and characters to meet or unique handcrafted locations to explore, but on the flip side, it also doesn't mean that the 900 or so barren planets don't have unique things on them, because life obviously isn't the only thing that could be completely unique to an environment. Some planets just have one biome, while other planets have a bunch, which sounds really interesting. And if you want to know what I think about the aliens, I'd say that they can be pretty hit or miss. Some look really cool, whereas others tend to feel like something I mashed together in Spore when I was 10, but overall I'd say they're interesting enough, and I don't have any strong critique here. And this alien looking thing we see here, I don't know what this is, but I have a fun speculative guess, and that is that it's actually a bit of a meme outfit the player can get, essentially wearing a cut open alien's body to avoid being attacked by them on a certain planet. Some of the barren planets have things for us to find, which is cool, but for the most part they seem to be there for resource collecting, and as Todd says, to give the player lots of options if landing on all these planets in a sci-fi game is something they're interested in. I'm excited excited to experience the kind of zen-like exploration he describes when wandering these desolate locations, but at the same time, it's definitely not why I'd be interested in playing the game, and I can't help but think it'll get old eventually. Even though it's optional, I do hope that it is truly that way in a practical sense, and that players won't feel silly if they don't spend heaps of time on barren planets harvesting resources to progress further through the game when they'd rather be doing something more exciting. It's cool to hear that you can also sell your data you collect for credits too, which does give even more incentive to those who are interested in that kind of approach. Todd also talks about how they do have the main cities and other quest-related ones that are set in stone, which of course you'd hope for in a BGS game, but then of course we have randomized landmarks like those two different ones shown in the showcase in the same spot. These landmarks may seem significant, but there's a good chance that they're not as special as a similar sized location would be in a game like Skyrim when you consider just how expansive the scale and scope of Starfield is. The large crystal-like structure, for example, may look rather unique because we haven't seen heaps of the game yet, but it could simply end up as a large geological structure to scan or get materials from. Same goes for this large Meridia's beacon looking building. There may be lots of structures similar to that which end up being a randomized abandoned colony experiment or a old communications base or something of that nature, and inside you can just find some loot, or maybe there's even some enemies now within it. I mean, you can just tell that when you see locations in the showcase like abandoned robotics facility or a abandoned mine, that these are the kinds of places that will be randomly placed onto a planet in different areas. This is not exactly my ideal setup. I would have preferred everything to be combed over by hand and be the same for every player, but it's not really feasible in a 1,000-planet game. Todd also mentioned that these locations, like outposts and so on, won't be extremely common all over planets, otherwise it would feel too gamey and break the sense of realism that they're trying to keep in their game world. I totally understand that, and Todd does reassure us that we will have lots of handcrafted content to dive into, so in many ways it comes down to whether you take his word on it or not. In the showcase it's mentioned that some of these random locations can have the same kind of storytelling elements we're familiar with in Bethesda games, though the camera shows the classic skeleton storytelling device that Bethesda loves to lean on in Fallout, and smaller touches like this might fit in alright and feel cohesive enough when randomly placed in a number of suitable environments. But what I think would work best in an ideal world, given what we know already of course, is that there would still be many planets you land on where there's an abandoned research lab or other quest-related place that actually has a unique name with a unique story you learn about by searching through terminal entries or reading a diary or meeting a living person who is a stranded survivor. Think of how Fallout games have their various vaults with vastly different vibes and stories for us to explore. This type of content would be set and always on this planet for every player. If enough things like that exist, hopefully with really cool characters to meet, quests to uncover without lots of radiant elements, then it may not matter so much if the rest of the planet is made up of large generated kilometer-squared tiles of terrain and some generated outposts and mining facilities and so on to fill it out. Then it would feel more like you can explore the rest of this planet if you want to, but if trekking around a barren rock isn't for you, you don't have to. And from what Todd is saying, it seems like that's what they're going for. I really do hope so. Sure, I'd prefer everything to be handcrafted in a BGS game, but the reality is we're getting a 1,000 planet exploration heavy game. It is what it is, and it may potentially end up a whole lot of fun and still satisfy those of us who are hungry for as many set places and stories as possible. Understandably, the ratio between generated and handcrafted content may still disrupt the feel of things compared to the BGS experience we're used to getting, even if in total there's more handcrafted content than any game they've done, like Todd Howard has said. But I think we're past the point of speculating if that ratio difference is the case. They are clearly going for a big exploration type of game, something that feels like No Man's Sky with Fallout 4 or Skyrim placed on top of it. We'll just have to see exactly how they pull that off. The heavy emphasis on settlement building in Fallout 4 definitely stopped a lot of cool content that could have been handcrafted in various locations from existing, as a blank canvas basically existed in its place instead, so I can't really blame anyone who is worried about a similar feeling occurring. Speaking of settlement building, I don't have heaps to say. It looks and sounds cool enough. I like the top-down view option too. Like I said, I just hope it doesn't feel like the thing you're stupid not to do if you're not that into it, because say the game ends up being so resource heavy, and if you're not constantly scanning and scrapping, you have a bad time. Todd saying that there's more handcrafted content than any game they've done is definitely exciting, but he also says just in the dialogue it's more than Skyrim and Fallout 4 combined. He also adds, as we get into locations and art and everything, we've done more of it than we've ever done. I can't help but wonder, how is this calculated? If the art and everything includes counting up every item on a huge list of unique food options, plus a plethora of settlement building options down to each little decoration like posters and stuff, in addition to every single one of the extensive shipbuilding modifications, then Todd could say his claim as a technical truth, even if the game actually ends up having the same amount or even less handcrafted content than Skyrim when it comes to contributing to the areas we really care about, like world building and lore. Even small assets or layout changes that go into making an abandoned mining facility with 20 different variations, say, can be counted into those stats. And it may feel like once you've been in 4 of them, you've been in all of them for that type. On the flip side, having so much dialogue definitely makes it feel like there just has to be enough quests and characters to make a truly amazing BGS game. Unless it's just comprised of hordes of random civilians dropping one-liners, then this is fantastic news. More dialogue sounds like more quests, and the good handcrafted stuff we'd expect from a BGS game. It also makes me think all the companions on offer will have plenty to talk about, so that we'll feel as or more connected to them than we do with a Fallout companion. That close connection with companions is what Bethesda are clearly going for here, and I'm excited to see just how deep the companions and their stories go. Though I'd also like to know the full repercussions if you do things they disagree with too much. So if you want to know why all this handcrafted content matters to me so much, beside it just being cool, it's that here at Fudge Muppet we are obsessed with deep lore and cool worlds. The more handcrafted things there are, the more lore there will be to soak up. It's that simple. Having places that have deeper and highly compelling story moments or well-crafted connections to faction power struggles or historical events. That's what I love in a BGS game. To learn about the culture of a lost alien race, learn about explorers who came before us, about conflicts between different factions, such as the Freestar Collective and the United Colonies, which we know from the memorial shown in New Atlantis. Stuff like that is what makes worlds feel worth exploring. If I land on a planet and go into a set building and find information on what happened there that talks about different factions and characters and battles that went down or alliances that used to exist and so on, then it feels like what I'm doing has meaning outside of just collecting more random loot and resources. I will care way more about the world if I can learn more about it on different planets and not only in the main cities. You may have fun boost packing around shooting space pirates in the face with a NASA punk shotgun, but it will be twice as enjoyable if doing so has more context behind it. Why are these pirates here? What are they searching for? Do they have a leadership struggle perhaps? Are they exiles from another faction we know about? Worshippers of the Great Serpent perhaps, who ended up forming an offshoot sect after uncovering an artifact they believe shines a different light on their god? Or are they just called pirates and they're there for whatever ore is here and they think the galaxy belongs to them but there's no real reason why? You get what I'm saying? There's undoubtedly going to be generic places and enemies. Every Bethesda game has them and it's expected, but it's those other factions and groups with their own histories, complex agendas, and intricate cultural systems that truly captivate us lovers of BGS games, and I want many opportunities to dive deep into them. One aspect we haven't talked about yet is the story premise itself. So far it seems like it will revolve around searching for the truth behind this alien artifact technology that appears to resonate with you, the player. At least from my subjective feel, the vibe I get so far is that you won't feel as pressured as you did in other BGS games like Skyrim to quickly rush off and address the dragon issue and save the world. This is what I'd want in an open world role-playing game, to be able to take my time or have playthroughs where my priorities are completely different to a hero on a high-speed mission and not feel silly for doing whatever it is I want to do instead. Yet at the same time, it also seems like we may be some kind of space dragonborn, which was something we joked about for a while. It looks like we see the player use special powers or perhaps just special alien technology in this scene and turn off gravity and kill or paralyze everyone using their hand. We also see the menu options expanded later to have another section which people are speculating may revolve around these abilities, whether they're granted from tech or something deeper. When I talk about Elder Scrolls 6, I've said that I'd prefer if we weren't destined to have superpowers because it can limit our role-playing identity options, and these powers that we didn't earn can sometimes overshadow everything else, including things we did earn. I guess we'll have to see how it plays out. Maybe it's something you unlock later on that feels really deserved, or something that doesn't feel too character changing for whoever it is you're role-playing out in space. It also sounds like we can ignore the main story, although I wonder how that will go with all the factions. If the faction setup is more Fallout game oriented, then we won't get to experience them as much if we avoid the main story, simply because in Fallout games they tend to be involved in the way the main story is completed. updated. However, if it is way more like an Elder Scrolls game, perhaps we can really just go and do an entire space pirate faction story without touching the main. I'm curious to hear way more about the factions. So far, the Crimson Fleet feels a bit bland to me, so I hope there's something deeper to them. I do love the sound of that serpent worship faction though. Any religious groups with their own mythology provide for the exact kind of lore I want to dive into. It gives me big Sadakal vibes, the Elder Scrolls serpent god in Yakutan mythology who is driven by hunger to eat one world to begin another, a bit similar to the Nords' Alduin. While Starfield has a huge emphasis on exploration, the game is also clearly providing stronger RPG elements than their previous games, giving us background and trait choices as part of the character customization options. This is something we've always wanted Bethesda to focus on. With tons of dialogue in the game, I hope there's many moments where we can use our traits or background to have unique dialogue like we saw at times during the showcase. Being able to talk like a character with specific knowledge or experience is great for roleplaying, but for this to really be a home run, I'd want it to change the outcome of a quest or situation in a way that other players might not have. The Beast Hunter moment in the showcase is cool in the sense that you get more reward for accepting the same quest, but others can also accept such a quest. There's nothing wrong with this, it's a cool option you'd want to have available, but I also hope we have moments where there's quest path changes only available for some characters. For example, the Neon Street Rat trait says you'll gain special dialogue options and access to better rewards from some missions on Neon, but I hope that's actually like a special gun only you can get, or a special way to approach a quest, and not just twice as many credits. I also noticed in one persuasion scene that it looked like the chance of success with a background-based dialogue option was the same as a regular option. We're not 100% sure how the speech system works just yet, although I've seen some pretty good guesses around online, but I do hope that the background option has more chance of succeeding if it leads to the same outcome, so it feels more meaningful to have. One thing I liked is that Todd has actually said he didn't want to make a game where players choose to have a chef background and it's kind of this meaningless thing that doesn't impact anything, so he's definitely voicing the right approach. I also don't have a strong opinion on the skill system necessarily. It seems alright. There's some bland ones you'd expect to see there, as well as some more interesting ones. The idea of fulfilling increasingly challenging tasks to make the next rank available is a new way of doing things, and I'm excited to see what cool builds we can come up with after getting our hands on the game. Starfield is a super ambitious game. Todd even says it's like 5 or 6 games in one, which can sound like a bit of a red flag, and maybe it is. But if Bethesda pulls off everything they're trying to do, then it must be an amazing game. Perhaps that's a big if though. What do you think? Personally, I think it looks like it's going to be quite fun, but I'm just keeping my expectations a little more measured than a younger me might have. Also, on the topic of shipbuilding, I'll say that that's looking pretty sensational. I think the space combat is looking better than before and a lot zippier. I really want to test out a nimble starfighter perfect for dogfights, as well as a giant cargo vessel. It's just great to see how that's shaping up, and I'm relieved to know it won't feel as clunky as it previously looked. I think the targeting system and energy allocation approach looks fun too, and it's neat to see there's even skills letting you specialize in it. Boarding enemy ships looks cool, but even better, I actually think, is the whole idea of being able to dock on large friendly ships and actually go inside them, thereby experiencing new unique locations that aren't just found on planets. Finding handcrafted content in space itself in the form of large ships or space stations is really cool. I also love the scanning contraband moment that makes me think of all the piracy roleplaying that might go on. I'm sure we can even invest in upgrading our ship to fool the scanners. Todd also mentions that shipbuilding is expensive, and even when you just go and take a ship by force, you still have to pay to register it, so it seems like we're actually going to have a lot to spend our credits on in the game, which is honestly good to hear after playing so many games where I just end up with 1,000,000 gold or septims or whatever currency it is, but I have no real incentive to spend it on anything cool. So there's plenty to look forward to. In general, I'm just not dripping in hype, and I think having some healthy skepticism's pretty reasonable. I was at the Fallout 76 Early Access event and was basically lied to about different expectations, just so you know where I'm coming from. On that note, I can also say that playing an hour of relatively curated gameplay doesn't scratch the surface of what the game's really going to be like, so take everything you hear from those who have had some hands-on time with Starfield with a grain of salt. That said, when Ryan McCaffrey from IGN played it, I was still happy to hear him say that the main city, New Atlantis, feels huge and is connected by a train system. I'm sure it'll probably be a loading screen hub type of thing, but still, I really hope it's as expansive as it's made out to be. Aquila is looking awesome, and Neon has a really cool premise too. The whole Aurora Pleasure City vibe has a lot of potential, although I won't be surprised if this club with the Teletubbies in the middle that they keep showing is the only kind of crazy venue in what you might expect to be some kind of degenerate hedonist cyberpunk mecca. I'm expecting something more like a heavily expanded version of Groundbreaker from the Outer Worlds, though I would love to eat my words on that one. Given that Scott and I will both be playing Starfield at the same time, we'll be able to give you some solid answers very early on about how much is randomized, if different choices you make actually affect outcomes in the game, and so on, just like we revealed early on with Cyberpunk, so make sure you're subscribed for that. We also have a sick Elder Scrolls video coming soon, so turn on your notifications if you haven't already. Thanks for tuning in to my very subjective thoughts. I hope you enjoyed them. My name's Michael, and I look forward to nerding out with you again very soon.